the Comedy Historian Podcast with Robert and Gemma Ross. Welcome to GigglePod, a new series where we explore your favourite comedy films, TV shows, and comedians. Hello, chums, and welcome to a new series of the Comedy Historian Podcast, and we are doing GigglePod. Robert, can you explain?
Hello. I think so, yes. We're going to be tackling a person or a film or a book or a series, all comedy, of course, because that's what we do. We are both comedy historians. And we've done so many shows over the years, you know, obviously the live shows during lockdown on Zoom and loads of cruise ships together. And we just thought it's about time we joined the gang that does a weekly podcast about our specialist subject, which is comedy. So we're spreading a lot of love and laughter with this new weekly show, if we can do one once a week. It's down to you, Gem. You're the producer here.
Well, it's a special day today. It's a centenary today. Whose centenary are we celebrating?
It is. And a lot of our chums are celebrating this wonderful human being, Kenneth Charles Williams, who was born 100 years ago today, February the 22nd, 1926. So, yes, amazing, really.
It has been amazing because there's so many different events, and I think there's something on BBC Radio 4 today.
It's lovely. Wes Butters, an old pal of mine, well, he's younger than me, but I've known him a long time, has made a brilliant feature film documentary about Kenneth's last years, and Wes Butters is hosting in between brilliant episodes of stuff like Hancock's Half Hour, and even Kenneth Williams reading extracts from the Bible, a good Sunday listen. There's a whole day on BBC Radio 4 Extra of Kenneth Williams. Giles Brandreth, who was a lovely old friend of Kenneth Williams, is at the British Library today with Sheila Hancock, and David Benson, who's also on tour with his solo show, which is 30 years old this year. Think No Evil of Us, My Life with Kenneth Williams. There's an event at Jermyn Street Theatre with lovely Madeline Smith and Russell Davis, who edited the Kenneth Williams diaries. It's wonderful, actually. I mean, you think that he's been gone nearly 40 years and he's still a sort of cultural touchstone, really, in many, many people's lives and many people's hearts. It does your comedy soul good to remember him so affectionately.
So why do you think we do still remember him? What makes him as a comedian stand out?
It's so hard, isn't it? Because, I mean, there were other camp comics that made it bigger earlier. Sid Field had a camp character in his repertoire before the war. Frankie Howard broke big after the war. I don't know, really. I just think Kenneth Williams had that sort of modern cynicism, a sort of intellectualism that he wore very lightly on his sleeve. He just made you think and made you laugh, and that's a really winning combination.
I think personally, for me, I think because he did so many interviews in the 80s, he was such a good raconteur. He was, you know, the guest that every host would want to get on.
Totally, yeah.
And that sort of did him a lot of good, really. You know, he could be Kenneth on these shows.
Yeah, heightened version of Kenneth, exactly. It's funny you should say that, because I remember talking to Jonathan Ross, years ago. No relation, although Paul Ross always says we are brothers by another mother. But I remember Jonathan Ross in the early days of The Last Resort on Channel 4. He was offered Kenneth Williams, or the production team were offered Kenneth Williams, and they turned him down because they thought he'd done so many chat shows. And of course, He kicks himself forever having done that, because you thought at the age of 62 or 61, whatever he was at the time of the Last Resort offer came in, you imagined he'd be around for at least another 20 years or so, and of course he wasn't. But it's interesting that, because obviously, as many of you know, I'm a bit older than Gemma, but the great thing about Kenneth Williams as well, being, we're going to mention Carry On here, of course, because it's probably the comedy that most people come to Kenneth Williams via. When I was growing up in the late 70s into the early 80s, you know, being, I suppose, consciously collecting comedy facts and figures and becoming a fledgling comedy historian would have been the early 80s. People like Kenneth Williams and Barbara Windsor and Bernard Bresslaw and Kenneth Connor and Joan Sims, they were still there, you know, still contemporary entities doing new TV shows, and as you say, being interviewed, particularly Kenneth and Barbara, particularly Kenneth. So they were part of the British light entertainment fraternity, really. So you could watch a Carry On film from 20 years earlier, and then you could turn that off and go on to BBC One, and there'd be Joan Sims in an episode of Only Fools and Horses or something, you know? It was that sort of, it was a tangible sort of feeling in this country that they were still part of the entertainment world, which was lovely.
How did he get started, Kenneth? I mean, how did he get into performing?
I was asked this the other day by Richard Herring about Spike Milligan and who was Spike Milligan's influence for comedy, and I said Adolf Hitler, which was an off-the-cuff remark, but it sort of was really, because Kenneth Williams was part of that brilliant, and who knows who we lost in the conflict, who was all equally brilliantly funny, but the brilliant people coming back after the war who'd served king and country in various capacities of the military. And Kenneth Williams was one of those, along with Spike and Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe and Dick Henry, even another Dick. And they were coming from the war. Kenneth Connor, John Pertwee, all served. And Kenneth Williams was one of those performers who'd really tried his hand in camp concert shows, and emphasis on the word camp, alongside people like Stanley Baxter in Combined Services Entertainment, CSE. And they just had naturally funny bones, all those people, and came back.
Wouldn't it be amazing to go back in time in a time machine and see some of those performances? Because I would think, I mean, we talk about this a lot, I know, in a lot of the shows, and, you know, when people interview us about how people got started, and we always talk about the sort of stage work, but particularly in the army years. And wouldn't it just be amazing to go back in time to see what those, because those performances are lost, you know, we will never get to see those or hear them.
No, you think of Peter Butterworth and Talbot Rothwell, you know, performing together on stage in the prison camp that they were in together. Absolutely. But I suppose the nearest you get is the brilliant Audience with Kenneth Williams from 1983, where he recollects some of those adventures. All I've got to say to people who know that is, what? The lamppost? And you'll know what I mean. But that's a Kenneth Williams and Stanley Baxter moment that they had together during the wars. Kenneth Williams, as you mentioned before, was always this brilliant raconteur, and he had this absolutely huge case full of anecdotes that he would drag out for Parkinson or Wogan or whatever chat show he was on, and would elaborate ever so often, add to each anecdote. And the more, it'd be like Ken Dodd, the longer the show, that he wouldn't cut things out. Kenneth Williams would sort of fine tune those stories and make them just hilarious. But yeah, the little moments like that, you can look back and go back in time with Kenneth Williams.
What was his kind of reaction though after he did those? Because we know of the diaries. Most of us, I'm sure, that are listening will have read the diaries. How did he feel when he come off those chat shows? Was it just purely he was doing those, like you say, it was his box of tricks and which one he was going to bring out, and then regretted it afterwards?
I think he did regret it a bit, but you know, we talked about this a lot in shows, and it's that drug of laughter and drug of applause, isn't it? And he knew he was guaranteed laughter if he pulled out that famous anecdote again. Flipping through, actually, just for something else, just flipping through the diaries the other day, I think it was like even about 1971 or something, and he's saying, I did a chat show and I pulled out the same story, the farting on the Carry On set, which was drawing the making of Carry On Up the Khyber, and Joan Sims being disgusted as Lady Rough Diamond, and Kenneth Williams saying, come, Joan, every great film lover farts. Even Rudolph Valentino used to blow off. And Gerald Thomas, the director, apparently said, yes, Kenny, but those were silent films. Yours is on the soundtrack, you know. But he said in 1971, which is 3 years after that happened, he's dragging that story out again to tell on a chat show. So he knew it was cause and effect, really. He knew it would get a brilliant laugh and it would get him, you know, a round of applause and probably get him another gig to be asked back on that show. But he thought, I'm relying on these old stories still. And they weren't even that old then. You know, he was doing those 15 years later still. But the diaries are a tricky thing because, again, as you know, all of you out there, he didn't write those to be published. You know, what he wrote to be published was his autobiography, Just Williams, 1985, which famously has him pose on the front cover, sat in front of a load of Let's diaries. So the diaries were the source for that autobiography, but there was no way he was going to publish his innermost thoughts, which what those diaries are, really. And they are endlessly fascinating, but have been sort of, I don't know, analysed and dissected so much over the last 35 years that it's just become almost, that's who Kenneth Williams was, rather than the brilliant performer that he, the legacy he left behind was as a very, very funny man who cheers everybody up but couldn't cheer himself up, I suppose. But it's that story of the sad clown, isn't it? It's Hancock and it's Robin Williams and it's Spike and all those people.
Yeah. I think today it would be very interesting. I know we often talk about this. If Kenneth Williams were alive today,
be 100.
He'd be 100.
It's possible. He could have been.
It is possible. Yeah. Would he? I can imagine him taking part in Twitter when it first came out, because he'd like the conciseness.
Absolutely.
I would think of words.
Absolutely, yes.
And then getting really cheesed off with it all and leaving Twitter.
Getting into battles with people about all sorts of things. It's funny, that's another thing. I think it was during lockdown, wasn't it? Who of the past would have been brilliant on social media? Kenneth Williams always came up, and Kenny Everett came up a lot as well. And they were both, fiercely witty, fiercely intelligent people. And yes, I'm sure Kenneth would have caused all sorts of headlines on his social medias.
Could you imagine him? I mean, also today, if we think about sort of I'm putting Kenneth into the 2026 culture here.
You shouldn't do that.
But just this idea of celebrity, and while we're saying like the 70s and the 80s, we saw that rise of the chat shows. Now it's something, it's the Traitors and things like that.
Oh, he would have been brilliant on the Traitors. Can you imagine
him?
You'd
expect him to be a traitor, though.
God, he would have been fantastic on the Traitors. Yeah, I suppose so. Or he probably wouldn't have done it. Oh, no, I'm not doing that. I don't play games on television.
And then done it, and then written about it.
Yeah. It's odd. It's funny, really. I don't. But I mean, of all of those, because he was an actor, he wasn't really a comedian. Frankie Howerd was a comedian who acted. Kenneth Williams was an actor who was very, very funny. Sidney James is an actor who was very, very funny. But Kenneth Williams sort of became a personality off the back of that. And as you say, when you see him in the Carry-Ons or you listen to him on Round the Horn or something, he became that high-octane camp character.
Could you imagine him in the jungle, right, having...
He wasn't in that one.
Kangaroos.
I know what you mean, yeah.
If he was like having, kangaroo balls or something else anus, could you imagine? And then you could imagine him going on the chat shows like Graham Norton afterwards.
And, yes, exposing all the secrets. I mean, I never even thought of that before. And you're giving me all sorts of visions of him on primetime ITV now. He would have absolutely gone for it, wouldn't he? He would have been so outrageous about it and hated it secretly. Probably quite loved it. He was a team player, but he was what's that thing about there's no I in team? But he was the I in team, really, Kenneth Williams, somehow, because he was that standout, completely unique caricature of a human being who, if you read the diaries, was also a very brilliantly well-read, introspective, rather shy person who became that outlandish character to hide that, really, which is the very essence of the performer. You become that character somehow, unless you could control it.
Now, I know the diaries, I'm going back to the diaries, because I know and Carry On, and obviously that's probably where you're going to discover Kenneth Williams if you first come to him. But how do you think he would cope nowadays with the kind of fandom? And they have like these celebrity signing events.
I do indeed. Yes, we've been to several. We've organised hundreds of those. I'm going to answer that question, but I'm also going to, because somebody beautifully this morning on our social media, and if you don't follow us, well, you must be because you're listening to this, but the Comedy Historian Facebook page, which is myself and Gemma, every day we celebrate anniversaries and brilliant comedy achievements. And I was celebrating what would have been Peter Rogers' birthday 2 days ago, February the 20th. So, if you're listening to this in July, it doesn't matter, but it was recorded 2 days ago. Somebody said about, I'm so grateful to Robert, for getting all the Carry On commentaries recorded. And that's one of my major regrets, that obviously we came far, far too late to get Kenneth Williams. I could imagine him being absolutely brilliant on the commentary for Carry On Up the Khyber or something, and relating the farting story again 50 years later or something. He'd have been great on those because he was an anecdotalist. He in his anecdotage even. He was so good at telling stories, and I think that would have been brilliant. But I don't know really. I mean, because he did book signings and he did do public appearances for book signings, and obviously, a lot of those chat shows were recorded in front of a live audience, the Wogans and all that.
But also, I mean, there's stories of, he would go to a restaurant and somebody would ask for his autograph and he would refuse it, or he'd go to a restaurant and he'd hide behind a curtain, but then be incredibly loud so everybody knew that it was him.
He was contrary, is what you're trying to say. He was, absolutely. But it's that thing, isn't it, that be careful what you wish for. You want to be famous. Or you're not only famous, but you want to be successful. I think nobody wanted to be famous, particularly in those days, but they wanted to be successful and employed, and working. It's a job. So the fact that your job, and if we can, I'm not going to go into great sways of his personal career and whatever and his personal life because that's well documented. But he was a serious actor. So off the back of all that campness during the war, when he came back to England, he wanted to be a serious actor, and famously he was the Dauphin in St. Joan, George Bernard Shaw's production in the early 50s, which was, obviously has gone to the mists of time, but the critiques of it, the critics absolutely thought he was fantastic. He did quite a lot of serious live TV work for the BBC around that time. But somebody in the audience for St. Joan in the West End was the radio producer Dennis Main Wilson, who thought he was brilliant because he played this aged character. He could do old voices really well. So Dennis Main Wilson, who was casting around for a new radio situation comedy called Hancock's Half Hour, thought that guy's great for the old man in episode 1. And that was it. And suddenly from that point, he was Kenneth Williams, comedy actor, Kenneth Williams, comedian. So,
it's interesting what you're saying, because I think, we, particularly through the, I'm sort of putting Kenneth into the 90s. This is good. We're having an imaginary Kenneth Williams career.
Well, Bill Holland, who just recently has published that brilliant Beyond Our Kenneth book, which is imagining him living a bit longer. I won't spoil it, but it's not that many years after Kenneth really died, but it's imagining him how he would have lived into the early 90s. And he certainly made Carry On Columbus, which would have been a treat. But anyway,
I think he would have done it.
He would have done it. Yeah,
I'm just thinking, back then, to a degree now, but I think less so. Back then, comedians, you did get kind of pinholed into something. And whereas now, from the 90s, we started seeing a lot of comedy actors popping up in TV series like Miss Marple or Inspector Morse. You could totally see him.
Yeah, absolutely. He was offered a role in the Avengers in the 60s, the Patrick McNee Avengers, not the superheroes, although that would have been fun as well. But so he was offered a part in that. And I mean, in that show, but they're actors, aren't they? I mean, they're not comedians. You're right. You're seeing comedians doing serious, like Harry Enfield's in Marple and those sort of people, aren't they? And a lot of the detectives are played by comedians, Sean Hughes and those sort of people.
Yeah.
But in the Avengers, you had a lot of good comedy actors in there. Roy Kinnear and John Laurie and those sort of people pop up, and they wanted Kenneth Williams to do one, and he turned it down. I mean, he would have been great in Doctor Who as well, I always thought. And they use a lot of comedy actors as well. I mean, all comedians, but like Ken Dodd popped up in 87 and that sort of stuff. But,
do you think he would have gone into writing? Because I think what the diaries show is that he was, and of course his own memoirs and things, was that he was a beautiful writer.
Absolutely.
I wonder if he would have ever written something straight or whether he would have written something comical.
Well, possibly. He wrote a lovely children's book called I Only Have to Close My Eyes, which is quite a rarity now. I can hear everybody jumping onto eBay as I speak, but it's very thin, slender volume. It's up there somewhere. I can't see it now, but it's up on my comedy shelf or our comedy shelf. But yeah, absolutely, he loved writing. But then there's another famous instance in the diary somewhere where he's written a piece for the Radio Times, and he gets quite huffy. I'm paraphrasing now, so forgive me, Kenneth Williams out there. But he writes something along the lines of, I've long got over the thrill of seeing my name in print. So he even sort of decried that a bit. But he was a brilliant writer. But talking about children's stuff, I mean, because I'm guessing, as you mentioned, you probably first encountered him via Carry On, did you?
Via Carry On. And then I think I was about 10, 11. Because remember, like, things were quite hard to get hold of. And so my brother remembers Will-O-the-Wisp. And we had the vinyl of Will-O-the-Wisp. So he would have seen it. He's 6 years older than me. So he was always much more ahead of where I was.
He still is, but go on.
And I think they released it on VHS, or maybe they were this was when the cable channels were starting and they were opening up and showing kind of old TV. Possibly, I can't remember. And but my introduction to Will-O-the-Wisp was definitely through the vinyl records, and that's because I had seen Kenneth Williams growing up, and then I think my brother had said we were going through the vinyls as you did as a kid bored on a Sunday. You know, we didn't have phones then to scroll through.
Happy day.
They were great. And so we were going through, and that would have been how I came to Will-O-the-Wisp. And then it was, I'm sure it was later. Eventually, they released it on VHS.
Yeah, we've got one. We've got one on our comedy shelf out on the hallway. Exactly. It was along the lines. It's like kids cult TV or something. They did the Flumps, and they did Bods. I think the strapline was something along the lines of "Relive Your Wasted Youth" or something. And they did the complete. There are many. They did the complete collection of Kenneth's Will-O-the-Wisp, and of course they brought it back with James Dreyfus narrating the new ones, or newer than the Kenneth ones, anyway. But you're right, we had the records as well, but this is the thing I mentioned earlier, because I lived through it, folks, because I'm older than both you and Lawrence. You can't imagine the thrill of hearing that voice doing a children's show. For me, it felt, for my generation, you got that guy from Hancock's Half Hour and the Carry-Ons doing a new show for kids. And even more importantly than Will-O-the-Wisp, actually, for me, was a show called Galloping Galaxies, which they don't repeat that one at all. I don't think there's ever been released.
Did he ever do Jack and Ori?
He did indeed do Jack and Ori.
I was going to say, he
absolutely.
would have been
almost
brilliant.
The record holder. I think Bernard Cribbins has got the record, hasn't he? But the Jack and Ori is the point, where David Benson's solo show comes from, because David Benson wrote as part of a competition for Jack and Ori. He won this competition, this storytelling competition, and the person that was chosen to read it on TV was Kenneth Williams.
Oh, wow.
So that's the connection between David Benson and Kenneth. But so this Galloping Galaxy thing was a science fiction. It was like sort of Red Dwarf for kids, basically. That's not quite true, but that gives you the idea of what it's about. And Kenneth is not in Vision on it. He's the voice of the two little computers called Sid and Sid Jr. That's CID. I can't remember what it stands for now. But anyway, it was a kid's. I've not seen it since about, since when it finished, about 87, I think it finished. But yeah, so that was also a thing that I
Did he do Panto?
No, he didn't. He did. He didn't like doing Panto. Yep. He did a production at the London Palladium in 1958 with Jimmy Edwards, and he was one of the Ugly Sisters in it, Kenneth. I've got the vinyl. Tommy Steele's the star of it. I've got the vinyl release of it. And the other Ugly Sister was Hugh Paddock. And they just started working together on radio in Beyond Our Ken at that time. So they were a perfect sort of combination as the Uglies.
Do you know, thinking about his kind of partnerships in the Carry On, my favourite partnership with him is in Carry On Constable, when it's Charles Hawtrey and they dress up in drag to try and catch the shoplifters.
Ethel and Agatha.
Really, Agatha.
And there's that brilliant line of Hawtrey's, isn't it? Like, I haven't done this since I was in the army in a camp concert. It's triple innuendo, really. Kenneth Williams and Charles Hawtrey in drag is never not going to be funny, is it? It's always going to be an absolute joy.
But I love those two together. Whenever
great.
they had a scene together, I thought they were incredible. And I think also, Charles Hawtrey's a show in himself.
He's a 3-hour special.
He's like, the way that they play off each other, I just think they're
brilliant.
Great.
I mean, again, without going into personal lives, but they're such a contrast. I mean, both gay men in a situation when it was illegal still in those early days of the Carry-Ons, but Charles particularly promiscuous and particularly open about it, his sexuality, where Kenneth was very closeted about it and almost would deny it in a way, So that works really well as acting sort of duo, and they are brilliant together. I mean, they really are. Even later on in stuff like Carry On Matron, when Hawtrey is Dr. F.A. Good, the psychiatrist, and Kenneth thinks he's going bonkers and having a sex change
Glug,
and all
glug.
that. And all that, exactly, yes. You a newt? Oh, I'm a newt and all that. But there's that sort of magical shorthand they've got together. They've worked together so long that they almost like, they don't make it up. It looks like they are, but it's scripted. But it's so believable in a heightened cartoon character sort of way. You believe those friendships and you believe those working relationships. And I love them both. I adore Hawtrey. I think he's the most photogenic actor in the series, quite frankly. Kenneth is just brilliant. I mean, he's got the record. I mean, 26 Carry On films. I'm counting That's Carry On there, folks, because he's in it, hosting it with Barbara Windsor. But it's an amazing, achievement, really, in such a short space of time, 20 years. And they're still loved. They're still being shown on TV. And it's almost unbelievable, really, because I mean they were old when I was a kid. I mean they were classics on TV when I was growing up, in the 80s, watching them, and and Sid had gone, and they were part of history even then, and that's 40 years ago, and they're still being shown and still, as you know, getting new fans all the time. We get letters all the time from people, don't we?
I think the best thing that happened was that during lockdown, do you remember I bought you some face masks?
Well, yes.
And you had them with the characters on. So there was a Sid James one, there was a Hattie Jakes one, and there was a Kenneth Williams. And you went into, at the time where we were living, our local Aldi wearing one. And do you remember there was a young guy behind the counter? And what did he say to you? It was quite funny.
He just looked at me and sort of beamed, and I thought, what have I done? And he just pointed at my mask and said, "Oh, he's so funny. I love him. Oh, matron," he was saying. I don't even knew who it was, but he knew the face and he knew the carry-ons, and it's just like, that's an incredible thing, really. You also got me one with a illustration, a pencil sketch of Peter Butterworth, and the slogan on the mask is along the lines of, "This mask cost me £1," but it's part of the language now, which is amazing, really, and it's heartwarming that those people are still so. The fact that you can get a smile out of somebody just by seeing your face, that's magic, isn't it? That's a real legacy. I mean, if people, I like people smiling at me, but not in a lunatic way. But, if you could cheer people up, which is what Kenneth Williams does, 100 years since his birth, you still make people laugh and smile when you see that face. That's something. That's a God-given talent somewhere. That's a beautiful thing to be able to do for people, I think.
Thank you, Robert. I think this has been really enjoyable. So this is the first one in our series. We are going to look at some films. We're going to look at some TV shows. We will even do some modern
We do.
television.
Yes, exactly. I get this on the social media. What are you dealing with that person for? Because it's comedy. We do all comedy, although we are known, or I'm known for, I suppose, the 25, 30 years after the war, particularly. But we celebrate everything that makes people laugh on this podcast. And we'll see how we go.
But also, Robert, I just want to ask you before we go, if anybody wants to wallow in some Kenneth Williams, what would be a good Kenneth Williams double bill to watch?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question.
I haven't prepared you for that one.
You haven't? I mean, I'll tell you, when I heard the news about Kenneth's death in 1988, my mum met me at the door and told me, because she knew that I had a sort of personal connection with him and loved him so much as a performer. When I heard the news that he died in April 1988, I put on my old VHS of Carry On Screaming so I could resurrect him. This is how sad I was. But I was emotionally upset by it, obviously. So I thought, I'm going to revitalize him with electricity and bring him back. And so I watched Carry On Screaming. I don't know. I mean, gosh, it's so hard. I'll tell you what you should watch. Okay, I'm going to do a double bill of Carry-Ons, because he's got to be Carry-On, although I do love him in Raising the Wind, another Gerald Thomas, Peter Rogers film. Raising the Wind is lovely. I love him in Twice Round the Daffodils, another Gerald and Peter film, which is a bit of sort of a serious version of Carry-On Nurse, really. But I suppose it's got to be his two most riotous, energetic Carry-On performances. It's got to be Julius Caesar in Carry-On Cleo, and possibly Citizen Camembert in Don't Lose Your Head.
Oh, really?
That's a good double bill. I think that sees Kenneth at his most brilliant and enjoying himself. And really, although Sid's in both of those films, Kenneth Williams seems to be the star of those two. He's just so good and enjoying himself so much. But go on.
My double bill would be the Tony Hancock surviving episode of him in Vision.
That's very good. The Alpine Holiday.
The Alpine Holiday.
Good choice,
I think that is something to go back to.
Don't be like that. Oh, God, yes. Okay.
And I just for old time's sake, Will-O the Wisp.
Nice.
Put on a nice comfort Kenneth.
That's I like a nice comfort Kenneth. And I suppose to round that off as well, we put up, I mean, last night, we're talking about, this is the actual day of Kenneth's centenary. Last night, BBC4 showed his episode from 1983 of Comic Roots, which, although it is Kenneth on and he's performing, it's as near as you can get, I think, to the real Kenneth walking around London streets and places, theatres that he knew and loved and were very important to his career. And that's on our website, on our Comedy Historian Facebook page. But if you search Comic Roots, Kenneth Williams, you'll find the BBC iPlayer link to that. It's only 25 minutes or so, but it's beautiful. And that's there for the rest of the year. And the last soliloquy of Kenneth in the theatre, just looking into the camera, I'm getting emotional now, but it's the most powerful thing you can hear that tells you why comedy is so important. He does it in a beautiful, sort of very therapeutic, theological way to it. But yeah, that's Kenneth at the peak for me. So you watch Carry On Cleo, Don't Lose Your Head, Kenneth's sole surviving TV episode of Hancock's Half Hour, The Alpine Holiday, a couple of Will-O the Wisps, and Comic Roots from 1983. There you go. Happy birthday, Kenneth, and thanks for all the laughs.